All right. Good morning to all of our audience, and welcome to our third cozy conversation with CCC. I'm Coffee Burns, the project manager for Community of Creative Champions, which is a subsidiary of 21st CCLC, Bright Futures at Eastern Michigan University. Today, I'm going to be co-hosting today's webinar with Alana Stone, one of our teen editors for our blog, and one of our project managers and outreach interns. Today we're talking about youth mental health, and we are going to be speaking with some of our community's leaders, people who work with youth in preventative care and all different aspects of youth health and mental well-being. We'd love to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. So why don't we start with Ariel?
Hello, I'm Ariel Pompey. I am a certified prevention specialist through Macbeth. I'm the program director of a program called Prevention Theater Collective that runs out of Engage at EMU.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ariel. Suzie?
Yeah, hi, I'm Suzie Staley. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I currently serve as the associate director at Neutral Zone in Ann Arbor, but I also am an adjunct professor at EMU and still a student at EMU. I don't know, I won't get into degrees, but as I'm looking around the room, I come from a 15-year history in Wayne Westland and working with Lynn and the Henry Ford. So just kind of have popped all over and had the privilege of working with lots of folks in the community and in Southeast Michigan.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And of course, throughout the conversation, we hope you'll have more opportunities to talk about what Prevention Theater Collective do, Neutral Zone, and all of your organizations so that our listeners can learn more about them. Alex.
Hi, I'm Alaniz. I use she, her pronouns. I currently am a case manager at Ozone House. I work through a grant called Homeless to House with young people aged 17 to 21. And previously, for 6 years, I worked at Neutral Zone. So I've worked with young people for the last 6.5 years. I graduated from Eastern last spring with a public health degree. So glad to be here.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. And last but not least, Lynn Malinov.
Hi, everybody. My name's Lynn Malinov. I'm the director of EMU Bright Futures and really excited to be here today. We, just for those who don't know much about us, are in 25 schools in 3 school districts, Wayne, Westland, Romulus, and Ypsilanti. And so we reach a lot of youth and a lot of families, and we do a lot of programming, but the most exciting programming we do is Youth Voice, and this is a Youth Voice project. I'm very excited to be here today.
Well, thank you all so much for being with us today. It is such a treasure to have you with us, especially on this Saturday morning when you could be sleeping or snuggling with your cats or whatever you do on a Saturday morning. So thank you so much for being with us. We are going to segue into our prepared question section that will be led by Alana. For all of our listeners, if you have a question, if you think of a question while you're here, feel free to go ahead and enter it and we'll just address it at the open Q&A section. So no need to wait. Just feel free to send them our way and we'll address them later. All right, Alana, take it away.
All right, so starting with the prepared questions, we're gonna be talking about youth, we're gonna start off talking about youth mental health and in the education community. So what do you think are the biggest stressors of high school, and how can educators and students work together to remedy that? Sorry.
I mean, I can start. I'll be honest, Lana, my first question is, what do you think is the biggest stressor, right? As a teen, as a student, and I'd love to know that, but I guess that would be my answer. Well, I think that would be my first question, and then my answer would be, I think it's ever changing. I think some things always stay the same, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of factors that go into what might cause a young person stress and distress, you know, whether it's crisis or family interactions or school or environmental factors. But I think the one thing that maybe I think about a lot is that every young person experiences stress and pain, and their pain is their own. And I'll credit Lynn. I mean, Lynn, so Dr. Malinov was my very first boss when I first started working decades ago. And the one thing she told me in my very first year is that we can't compare pain, and that everybody's pain is their own, and that people feel stress and pain in their own way, regardless of maybe how escalated their experience is. So I think for me, it's really talking to young people to see what's going on. And then, you know, if and when you're comfortable, I'd love to know what you think is really relevant to young people. I guess that would be my answer.
Yes, I'm with Suzie. That was the first thing that came to my mind because of my job title. I'm like, what do you think? And that's just because of the position I am in. However, when I thought on the question a little bit harder, I started to think about the science of things and its stressors. So we all know that as humans, like when there's change happening, there's like this pull in our body, right? That it becomes rebellious just a little bit, because it's like, you know, I'm used to this, right? And so now you're trying to pull me into something different. So when we look at high school students versus, you know, the middle school like curriculum, the way that their schedules were set up in middle school, and then jumping into high school, and that schedule is just like, you know, hour after hour, compared to middle school, which was like, you're with this teacher for this long block of time. I think that is one of the factors, is that change in that schedule. Also, learning those new group of friends, right? So everyone doesn't transfer to you with that high school. So now you have to deal with that change on top of it. So your body is like, you know, what are you putting me through? What are we doing? And you're trying to fit yourself into the way of the world in which you're in at that moment. So I think that is one of the biggest stressors for teens and youth as they transition into high school.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I also think the pressures of like fitting in and finding yourself while also having, you know, academics and family issues, and like trying to like find yourself while everything is happening around you. And then especially this last year with like being isolated within that, and not being like having a hard time fitting in or feeling a part of anything while you're stuck at home in a virtual world. So
Definitely. I love listening to you guys like talk about that, because you guys care so much. I think that's so amazing. So thank you guys for that. So on to the next question. What is the common or biggest obstacle to getting help that you encounter when you're working with youth? So do you want me to ask that again? Okay. So like when you're working with youth, like what is the biggest obstacle to getting them help?
I think one of the biggest obstacles that I've come across is that youth recognizing that there may be an issue. So like they don't want to say that there is an issue, because like the stigma around it, like you think I'm going to call you crazy, or it's going to leak out and your peers are going to call you crazy. So it's just, you know, admitting that there may be an issue. It doesn't have to be a problem. It doesn't mean that you're spiraling down into this like negative world. It's you recognizing that something positive needs to happen for you to further, you know, accomplish your goals. So, yeah.
yeah, I agree. The stigma, I think, is huge. And I think even recognizing that something's wrong and something might need, that they could get help with something. Also, the time it takes to build trust with that young person for them to open up and really tell you what's going on so you can give them the best help that they need.
I agree. And just to kind of add to that, I think going off of what Alex just said, as you're building trust, sometimes I think for young people and even adults, but especially for young people, when you're connecting to resources, sometimes it takes a little bit to find a match or to find the right treatment plan or to figure out what the best course is. And that can be frustrating because it's not a super quick fix, but it does happen, and it is really successful if you give it time. But I think when we're feeling so overwhelmed, it's sometimes hard to stick with it.
Yeah, and to build off that too, it's like you build trust with the young person to like get them to open up, and then you refer them somewhere else, and then they have to rebuild trust all over again. And so it's really hard for the young person to have to continue to open up and talk about what's going on.
And I was just thinking about that, like the follow-up is really difficult, especially if the referral has already went out, right? So it's like the student or youth may get stuck in the whirlwind on that end. However, they have built that trust with you, but they're afraid to come back to you because they think your job is done, or that you don't want to help them anymore, or you're too busy. And that's, really not the issue.
I'm curious, while we're here, what solutions, if any, to that kind of problem of, moving from one person to the next and having to establish trust over and over again? What pathways to either eliminating that or making it less of an obstacle do you see?
I'd like to jump in and say that one of the pieces of research that really drove my work when I was at the alternative high school in Wayne Westland was this piece that, and it was in a medical journal, said that one meaningful adult in the life of a young person was what it took to get that person to either the help they needed or get them on course or help, support them to get to where they needed to go. And I think that is, in some ways, I don't like the idea of a magic bullet, but that one's really important. And I think most of the youth that I think about who had, things happen in their lives that were tragic or really impactful or really required some extra support, if I had a safe and trusting relationship with them and I said, hey, I'll go with you and walk you to this next move, and then checked in on them regularly, the transition generally went pretty well.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's the warm handoff and the follow-up. So Alex and I work for agencies. We 3 years ago started, so Alex has actually seen it from a couple of sides, and Alex, jump in, but we have a partnership called Opening Doors to sort of address that exact question, where Neutral Zone, Ozone House, and Corner Health Center, we have a program essentially that if a young person walks into one of our doors, they're walking into all of our doors, and they get a warm handoff and they get referrals. And we share a social worker, and so there's some continuity and across organizations. And Alex, I don't know if you want to add on to that, but
Yeah, I think one of the solutions to this is the warm transfers and having that trusted adult, like maybe go with you to your first appointment to the next place. I think it's been a standstill and I haven't been able to see it from the Ozone House side because we can't do those in-person transfers right now. So that's been very difficult, and the young people are less likely to even make it to that second referral. But when it started at Neutral Zone, and there was a social worker who came on site at Neutral Zone to like build relationships with the young people there in case there was a reason to, refer them to Ozone House or Corner Health for more needed resources that they weren't getting, and had a mental health program at Neutral Zone to like open the door to like maybe possible more resources in the other organizations.
a common risk assessment that we all shared that was developed by Ozone House, but that's shared out with staff at all 3 organizations. So I think, I mean, and I think you're right, Alex, once we're through the pandemic, I'd love to kind of hear what it's like on all, like what it looks like and see what it's like on all sides, especially from you, right, who's seen it from a couple of different organizations. But I think it's been really successful because there is that deeply embedded trust. And I think if we can, I think it's continuing that collaboration and trying to be really consistent and going back to what Lynn said, right? I mean, relationship building is, and Alex, I mean, and that's the key to all of it.
I think the most complicated thing is identifying those students who need that adult, right? Because some students don't have that adult. And so like at least within the context of school counseling, support in the school environment, having people who are watching for students who have isolated themselves because they don't have that significant adult, supportive person that they trust, and to try and identify those kids and then match them up. Because it might not be, the person who identifies them may not be the right person to be their support person.
Right.
And I think, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Piggybacking off what Lynn was just speaking of is when it's hard to identify those students, usually those students have been adulting themselves for so long that we see them as independent, right? Those are the students I think need like the most, like they need that adult pairing, right? Because they've been adulting, they have so many roles and responsibilities in their home life, and they're rock stars, right? However, for them, it's difficult for them to ask for help because they're in the mode of adulting. Like I've been doing this by myself for so long, and I'm, practicing and putting myself through this for so long that I don't need help. So yeah, I just wanted to drop that in.
And kids who come from families where there is illness, whether it's alcoholism, which is a disease, whether it's mental illness, whether it's some sort of trauma that's really kind of overtaken the parent, those kids take on a role in that family. And oftentimes the role is to be the primary caretaker for younger siblings. And those kids are really hard to pin down because some of them look like heroes. They're all A students and they're just wandering alone, getting all A's so you don't notice them. So it's not just students who present their trauma, but it's also students who are like super brilliant at hiding all their trauma.
I would say too, like young people like that not trusting the system or being too scared to talk about what's going on because they don't want to be taken away from their family or things like that, where different communities don't necessarily trust adults and have been wronged by people in their life, so they're not going to open up to some people.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is I would assume when in terms of targeting, like sort of targeting or trying to pinpoint young people that need services, I think one thing that I think about is like there's certainly we want to know who needs immediate support, but I think I try to always think of the rule that we know, and going back to data shows us that all young people, no matter where they're at, need a trusted adult that is not in their family unit or in their household. So I think if the goal can be to make sure that every young person has a trusted adult, then and sort of whether it's an intentional mentoring or a natural mentorship or partnership with an adult, that's when we can start to kind of assess and I mean, one, provide the supports, but then kind of assess and triage where the need might be.
I have a question about, because you guys were talking about, I really appreciate all those points that you guys were bringing up, because like, I know these people that you're talking about. I know these people who don't trust like adults who are those independent family leaders as teenagers. So how do you think as a youth, like who sees these in my peers, how can I help them or try to get them those mentors or get them to reach out?
I think as a peer, one thing that I recommend or suggest is that we know that we can't help everyone, right? However, people want to be recognized for the things that they do. So as a peer, one of the greatest things you could say to a peer that you see that is going through a situation as such is, I see that you are really taking care of your family. Or, dropping just some of those things that you recognize in them because they know that someone notices it. And then they will open up to you eventually a little bit more, like, piece by piece. It may not be a lot, or it may be a lot at one time. They might dump a lot at that one time. But those youth just want to be recognized. Your peers just want to be recognized.
Yeah, I would say validating and also just leading by example. Just showing, you could show your positive relationships with adults or talk about it every once in a while with these friends, and maybe that could be beneficial to them.
Yeah. I agree with all of that.
I don't mean to advertise for Bright Futures. But I mean, it's an example of a program where we know that our first order of business is to create a safe and supportive environment, and we know how to do that. And so if a student is part of Bright Futures and then knows someone and hears that they're home and caring for their family and they have a lot of responsibility and they are also in need, taking that information to the adults that you trust in Bright Futures or dance or whatever whoever your trusted adult is, and helping, getting some help from that adult to connect that student, it is a real good thing to do. And tell the student that you have these resources. How do they feel about you connecting them to it? So that they're not hit in the side of the head with some stranger coming up to them and saying, "Hey, I can help you." But I think when kids who have similar challenges get in a room together in a safe space and can talk about it, it's super powerful. It ends the isolation. So what kinds of programs are there that end that isolation?
I just want to note that I love Bright Futures. I worked with Bright Futures for a minute with Crosstown Theater. And I did see that when the students would start off, right, everyone would be in their own corners or what. So eventually they learn of each other through the programming, right? They can participate in any of these classes. And so sometimes our program would provide pizza. And it was like, sometimes there was a lot of pizza left. And students wouldn't speak up and I would say, "Come get the pizza." And then eventually I remember one day someone was like, "Hey, so-and-so, take this pizza because I know that you have to, stop by wherever and go to the grocery store and pick up for your brothers and sisters." And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, I love that because like that student recognized that that student had done that. Or was doing that task for their family. Like, I'm going to stop by Kroger on my way home so that I can feed my brothers and sisters because my mother is at work. And that other student said, "Hey, no, grab that pizza for your brothers and sisters." And it wasn't like, a joke or anything. It was just, what it was. Like, you can still do this task, but we're going to cut some of your time out so that you're able to provide for your brothers and sisters, like right on the spot when you get home, even if it's just a snack. And I love that about Bright Futures, that those students really make great connections.
I think that's one of the best things that young people could do for each other, right? In a really like helping to support some of the things that they need while still giving your friends an opportunity to participate so that they can feel like they matter and that they belong and that they can be part of a group to start to build relationships.
So there, Bright Futures is an example. There's a whole lot of examples out there. right? And it could even be being in a specific class that the school's designed for kids who need support and are going to work together, or they're going to, do some mentoring or whatever. It's just being sure that kids are connected. I think in the COVID space, one of our missions has been, well, I know that in the COVID space, one of our missions has been to tether kids, to find the kids we know and to connect with them, even if it's a phone call once a week or once a month, to be sure that they know someone is thinking about them and somebody cares, since everybody's been so isolated. So that's that whole connectedness and community building piece is just really essential to development. And it's essential to all of us. So right now, I think everybody's pretty edgy and pretty tired of being isolated. And I think the needs are growing right now, but we're so used to being in this space, we're not talking about them as much. So it's a very interesting time.
Definitely. Thank you guys for your responses. They're very powerful. I loved hearing that story about the pizza too. Yeah. So thank you guys. So on to the next question. What advice would you give educators and caregivers of students and kids who struggle with mental health issues? So from that like mentor standpoint, if we can get them into the mentorship or just like caregiving relationship, how can they help?
I mean, I think for me, it would just be, be consistent. I think it's just about consistency and relationship building. And I feel like a broken record, but I don't know that there's anything more important than that. And I think once we have a relationship, then we sort of have the keys to the kingdom in terms of ushering young people or connecting them to the services and supports that they need. So that, I mean, that would be always my baseline advice. Relationship building and being really, really consistent and showing up when you say you're going to, and right. I mean, just those really simple things of not abandoning young people. And if you say you're going to be there at 5 and you can't, then you need to call, but really just being really consistent and treating young people with a lot of dignity and respect and building strong relationships.
I would say too, I mean, I can't imagine it's an easy task as an educator, and you're overworked and underpaid, and you have a lot of students that you're responsible of. And so something that I believe in is more of like instead of punishing, like when young people are acting out, referrals, I think, or like just noticing behaviors and maybe taking that extra minute, which with students who are acting up, to like check in and see if they're okay, rather than just shoving them out of the classroom and being done with them. So I would say more communication rather than less communication. And yeah.
Thank you guys. I definitely agree. And you guys, yeah, you don't sound like a broken record. It's really like, it's like fruitful to hear that, because it's important. It's what's important. So how do you think educators and students can help combat the stigma that is surrounded with mental health? That's kind of a hefty question, but
Sorry, I'm trying to get myself off mute. So one of my charges with Prevention Theater Collective is social norming. And I think that is a way to combat that stigma. And saying that, that means what are positive things that people are doing or youth are doing? We're so twisted into talking about the negative all the time, like, oh, 30% of students do this negative, right? And then we're pushing this information, 30%, 30%. We never look at the 70%. We never say 70% of students are doing positive things. Now, we fed that information that way, people would follow that information that way. And I think that is one way to combat the stigma based around mental health and or substance use.
I think having adults around too who normalize it as role models is really important. Ariel brings up substance use, and that's an area I know pretty well. And in that area, if we bring in people who are recovering from substance use disorders, who are living pretty normal lives and having a pretty good go of it, and they talk about their recovery and what that looks like, and we do that with other mental health related problems, then the kids know that they're not going to be stuck, they're not going to be stuck where they're at, that there is work to do and then hope as things progress. And I think kids need that hope. Yeah, I think hope is really important. And accountability. One of my favorite stories is a student of mine who's now older than most of the people other than me who are here, who said to me about 10 years ago when I was asking her what worked when she was at the alternative program. She said, look, you loved me no matter what. That love never changed, but you also held me accountable. And that was really important. So how do you get to that with a student, a student who's got a mental health issue that really they'd benefit from getting some support with it? How do you support them in a way that you hold them accountable to do the work, right? To put themselves out there, to trust, to participate. And I think maybe Suzie, Alex, and Ariel have some strategies they use. I don't know.
I think being conscious of wording. Sorry, Alex, you can go ahead.
Oh, no, you're good. Go ahead.
I was saying being conscious of our wording, right? When we talk about certain health issues and or substance use disorders, right? So if I say someone's an addict, you already have a set of words that go along with that word. Or if I say someone is crazy, there's already a stigma that's with that word, right? But if I say someone has a substance use disorder, you're going to think about it in a way that Lynn kind of touched briefly on earlier. It is an illness, right? This person needs help. And that's the same thing for mental health issues also. Like, we grow up and we hear, Auntie blah, blah, blah was crazy. And we create this whole story about her with other negative connotations, than really naming what it is. Like, it is what it is. It's nothing else. And we're going to make the person a person and not the person their issue.
Yeah, I agree. I think the best way to combat stigma is to talk about it. And not only talk about it, but talk about it in a positive way. And I think as adults in the room, we need to do the research and stay up to date on what are positive ways to talk about issues like substance abuse. The wordings and the names that are appropriate to use have changed throughout the years. So as adults, we stay up to date in like learning and educating ourselves on what is appropriate and what is positive. How can we talk about these things positively? And I think in relation to, substance abuse disorder, doing that the same around mental health. And as adults and teachers in the room with young people, talking about those on a day-to-day basis and normalizing it, because most of our young people struggle with mental health and anxiety and depression. And so rather than like keeping quiet about it, that just adds to the stigma. We just talk about it and normalize it. And that's also a way to bring young people together, is to, give the door, like open the door so that young people can talk about it together,
I think that's really good. And those are all of my strategies. Again, being really, when you're consistent and you have good relationships, you can talk about just about anything. And if you're talking about it in a positive and appropriate way, that's great. And then you can bring in, as you know, was mentioned, you can bring in people to talk about it that are thriving and that have navigated how to manage. And I think myself, like me, right, as somebody that struggles with mental illness, I think it's okay to talk about it, and I think it's okay, right, while setting good boundaries. But I also think it's okay to share, because I also think there is something about othering. Not to say that if I wasn't struggling, then I certainly wouldn't say that I was, but I think it's okay as adults to share where we are at and what is happening with our own identity. So then it really makes it, you know, a real and normal and functioning part of our lives, you know, and whatever that looks like.
Yeah,
And I think that's relatable to teens.
And I think another strategy that we discussed earlier that kind of works here is acknowledging. I think that's one of my biggest things in my group is if someone shares something, I say, thank you for sharing that. You shared something very vulnerable, possibly, right? So I'm acknowledging that you said this. How does that make you feel? Opening up a whole nother door, right? And also having the other students acknowledge that their peer has shared something vulnerable as one of the strategies. So we're always practicing acknowledging in Prevention Theater Collective.
Thank you guys again. Oh my gosh, you guys are just so like amazing. I love like this conversation. Thank you guys so much. Moving on to, we've touched on this a little bit, but like COVID times, that's what we're in right now. Huge thing that's very, it affects mental health very heavily. So what do you think has changed prior to the pandemic to now while we are living through it? Do you think people have become more aware of mental health issues or are shying away from it?
I think people are learning a bit more about it because people have to sit in their own space, right? Things that people in a general sense didn't think that they were dealing with, they realize that they're dealing with it, right? So they have the guts to speak up about it. And that is opening the door for everyone and anyone to speak up about any issue that they're dealing with at home, in their space, right? So I think that is a big change in this time. I don't think there's still people who are living in privacy, but I think people are speaking about it a little bit more because they're able to assess themselves in their space. In their space, in their own time, yes.
I totally agree.
I think too, something we've noticed at Ozone House is it is more talked about and it is more prevalent. The harder thing is the resources aren't necessarily there, and also being able to have a space, and because everything is virtual, to talk to like a professional, you sometimes don't have the privacy to be able to do that where you are at, or you might not even have the means like a phone or a computer to be able to get those resources that you may need. So that's been difficult in navigating resources.
I think I see some raised awareness with some of the population. And then I think that there's the untethered youth and families. So people who have limited access electronically, families where the parents are essential workers and they're out of the house a lot and real concerned about getting sick, families that have had a lot of illness with COVID and a lot of loss and the absence of the traditional formalized process of funerals and grieving. So I think while there's raised awareness, there's also a segment of the population that's just detached from all of that and just barely surviving. And I think we're gonna reconnect with folks as the vaccines roll out. I'm thinking maybe in the fall, if we're lucky, there'll be, massive vaccination by the fall. And it's looking like this administration is making that happen, and that is very hopeful. And I think when we get back, we're gonna just have a lot of unanticipated. I mean, we could try to anticipate it, but we don't really know. When we get back, we're going to have a lot of investigating to do and a lot of listening to do to figure out how to be supportive. It might look different. There may be really needs we didn't anticipate.
I think it will look different, right? And I think it will be. I mean, we've all been through a collective trauma on top of whatever we were and or are going through the pandemic individually, and how that's affected each individual young person and their family or their supports. But then I think it's almost like we'll be post-COVID, sort of when we're back face to face, we'll be post-trauma in some ways, but we're sort of establishing this new normal. So we're healing from the grief and trauma and crisis of COVID, but we're entering this strange and brave new world. And I think as providers and caregivers and educators and supportive adults, we're sort of walking in a few different worlds, and that's going to be new for us too, right? Because we'll be healing from sort of post-trauma and addressing that, but looking at these new systems and new supports that will need to emerge, that I'm guessing in some way, I mean, I think we'll adapt quickly, but we don't even know what that will look like yet.
And I think, and I say this often in the COVID space, that we helping professionals, that a major part of our role is to demonstrate what it looks like to do self-care and I mean, self-care it doesn't even sound broad enough, but to demonstrate how are we being present for ourselves and being sure that our oxygen masks are on, and that we are taking care of our basic needs and our spiritual needs, and then talking about how we're doing that with young people so that they get a little bit of direction about how to do that, and demonstrating it, because we need to be the role models right now. We need to show to the best of our best guess, like, what is the healthiest mental health experience we can make for ourselves. What are we actually doing? Like, are we taking walks? Are we meditating? Are we writing? What are we doing? Playing music and talking about it, so that young people get permission to find ways to do self-care that work for them in the current moment.
Yes, off of what Lynn was saying, like really defining what self-care is a major thing. One of the last lessons that I just had with my group of students was drawing a line between what is self-care and what is self-maintenance. Mm-hmm. It has a line has to be drawn through it, because we also learn these things from adults where taking a bath is self-care, and I'm like, that's self-maintenance, like that's something you have to do, or what. So, but a lot of people have categorized it in self-care, because I guess there was a point in time where, if I had to go for the day, I had to go. And like I said, we're living in our spaces, and we're able to assess our spaces and how we're living, that we really need to define like those things that we enjoy, and how can we do them in these COVID times. Like, one of the things I love to do is write. I'm still trying to find time to put it in, because I know it's part of self-care for me. And so I charge my students with doing the same thing. Find something that you really enjoy. If it's putting the little diamonds on the pictures, then it's for you.
I think that's super important. Obviously, self-care is so important and needs to be triaged to the top. But I also think I've really started, especially in COVID, understanding the notion of community care, and knowing that while self-care is really good for me, and speaking of some, like for somebody like me, I am very interactive. I'm an out loud processor, and I need to be in community to not feel so siloed. So also sort of knowing when we need to balance and how to balance self-care and also sort of some healing and supportive community care.
And also, I would add to that, like not being judgmental of people's self-care. Because I have a lot of young people where like my self-care might like really different than a teen self-care. Like they might want to sit on TikTok and laugh for 2 hours, and like not judging that and not saying, well, maybe you should try something else. Like just listening and validating people's different types of self-care, I think is also important as an adult.
And I'm with Suzie, like that community self-care. I'm always like looking at my door, like, is my neighbor gonna go out there and take out the garbage so I can step on my porch and talk to them for a minute? Because it's just, I have 2 under 2 and that's my husband. And sometimes I want to talk to someone different. And that's because of the work that I'm in and just the type of person I am. I am also a community self-care person. Like I like to be around people and listen to people and learn their stories. So sometimes I take a walk around that block and I'm hoping that someone is sitting on their porch in the cold. So I can say, hello, how are you? Just to feel that community, vibe. Ooh, I love it.
So I totally, I love the community care piece, and I agree, Alex, with what you were saying, but I would add to that I think young people need to be given new options for self-care as well. I see that some of the young people choose to do self-care things on screen, and there are consequences to being on screen so much. So, I mean, physical consequences and emotional consequences, and it's a lot of consequences with vision and things like that. So, so giving, teaching them that there are also options like going outside for a walk. You've got a phone in your pocket, take some pictures, draw some pictures, do something artsy. What can you do on screen that's self-care? But what do you do off screen that's self-care? And what's a good cutoff time so that you get good sleep? Because I think a lot of young people don't know that doing a lot of screen time before you go to sleep is disruptive to sleep and you don't get good quality sleep. So there's some lessons to be shared across the board, all of us, amongst all of us, because different people know different things. So I think you validate and then you help kids frame their self-care in a way that also takes into consideration some of what we know about the impact of the choices we make. And they might know nothing about, the light from the screen and how it affects sleep. I'm the oldest one here, so I can talk about those things.
I also went through that with my students in the past 6 weeks. So we all go on our phone and we find the way to dim the screen, right? There's a light that turns from blue to yellow. So your body kind of gets sleepy on its own just from looking at the yellow light. Your body's like, I'm not going to process this phone. Then your phone analytics are also telling you, you spend this much time on the phone. So it's like, hey, let's make a pact and try to get that an hour down, right? So if it says that you're spending 12 hours on your phone, let's try for 11. And we can see that because your analytics on your phone are telling you, hey, you've been on Facebook this long and you've done this long, right? So I guess like finding those, kind of doing those like refresher courses on how to get your phone and your screen time to work for you, but also having yourself work for yourself so that you are better mentally.
It's hard too during COVID because screen time and through your phone is the only way you get to feel community some of the time. So it's like finding that balance with the young person, especially a young person who's struggling with, housing insecurity or like is in survival mode a bunch of the time. And like, that might be the only way they know how to shut their brain off. But Lynn, you're right, 100%, like talking to them about other alternatives, like not condemning the phone use, but like, hey, maybe try an hour off the phone, like Ariel just talked about, like just like little tiny shifts in behavior, but not taking away their sense of belonging at the same time.
Yeah, I really I appreciate all that's been said. It's definitely like kind of, it's like assessing your own life, like how am I like taking care of myself? How am I like talking to other people about how they should care for themselves, you know? So yeah, thank you guys. So what mental health resources would you recommend for students and families during the COVID pandemic?
I can say what we refer at Ozone House is we have a 24-hour crisis line. We refer people to, and we work very closely with Corner Health. We have, youth and family therapy on site. The hardest thing right now is the wait. A lot of people have wait lists, but the good thing about like a crisis line, or we have a crisis text line, is that it's 24 hours and it's like someone who will always be there and will always respond to you. So if you're feeling in that crisis in need of like needing to talk to somebody, but then planning long term around like wanting to find resources for mental health, like that, they can always reach out and get that from the crisis line.
I would agree. I mean, in terms of Washtenaw County, I mean, Ozone House would be our first referral, and or Corner Health Center. I think one really rich resource that I think a lot of people maybe don't think about, and I'm super grateful for it. So like, Alana, in Wayne Westland, you have the Family Resource Center, and they have a list. And so every school district or every RESA or ISD has, if you call, they have a list. And Wayne Westland has a really great one. It's like a 25-page list, and it has all sorts of supports, not just certainly for mental health supports and food supports and sort of emergent need support, but it also has lists around like, okay, I need some car repair and I don't know where to go. I mean, it's a really, really big list, and most family resource centers in any public school district has a family resource center or a homeless liaison, and they will have a resource list of supports in your area. Neutral Zone does have one for Washtenaw County, but the schools probably do too. The one in Wayne Westland does spread out for Wayne County, but I think that would also be something that I would say, right, all kinds of supports. And I think, one thing, as an LGBT person, we've also noticed in just sort of things that come up, we've noticed that lots and lots of young people, as they've been at home sort of reflecting on their identities, they have started to come out as part of the LGBT community. So there's also, oh, thanks, Lynn, for putting that resource in the chat. I think a lot of people, as we're exploring, we're sort of uncovering the layers of ourselves, and how do you get the supports that you need in the pandemic. So I think there's lots and lots of identity supports for young people that are dealing with all sorts of things, and their families.
Yeah, I think another resource that kind of gets left in the wing, because a lot of people think that school counselors are just there to make my schedule, right? That sometimes that school counselor is the first step to that list of resources that may be available in that area or what. So I think a lot of students are unaware that their counselors do have those lists provided. Like, so with my program, if an issue arises, I'm able to go to the counselor who enrolled them into my course, and we work it out from there. But that counselor being that first step person.
Thank you. I like, hopefully, I really hope that someone sees this who's looking for those kinds of things. Yeah. So youth mental health and policy. what are some ways that we can advocate for mental health issues in local policy?
So I know the new prosecutor in Washtenaw County is, well, his jurisdiction is with adults. Ellie is really, really committed to prevention and to supporting prevention initiatives in the county, so that if a young person makes a really bad choice and gets in some legal trouble, what they get is help. And that's a new reframing for this county, and I'm very excited about it. So I think people who want to get active in Washtenaw County can call his office and say, I want to talk about the needs of young people. And they'll connect you with their pipeline, because they do have youth advisors, and they really are reaching into the community. So that's one cool resource in Washtenaw County.
And he will talk to you. I mean, he's doing great. I think, but going off of that, I think it's just, again, amplifying your voice. I think young people, your voice is strong and your voice is powerful, and we want to listen. And I think we can, I mean, I know we say this, but really reaching out, especially to your local politicians. They are the most accessible to all of us, and going and talking to them, and, partnering with adults if you want to on it. But I think just your voice is so important, and really amplifying it. I mean, look at all of the things that have emerged and all of the platforms that have been amplified because young people, you're brilliant and you get it, and you have a strong voice, and I think, stand in your truth, and that's, I mean, that would be the first thing that I would say is, and let us help, and tell us how we can help you.
We just had a window full of youth, and 4 legislators from the state of Michigan, and the youth shared their stories about out of school time programs and how they've gotten support from them. And their effort was to push policy, but also to push resources to get these legislators to support programs for out of school time support. Because if there's good out of school time programs, that means the parents can go to work and not worry about their kids. So it's not just for the kids. It's also economically really wise for the state to put resources into out of school time programs, so kids are in a safe and supportive environment, and their parents can work until 5 o'clock or whenever they're done.
And to build off what Suzie and Lynn has said about like Ellie Savitt, is like young people, and especially in Washtenaw County, can have a voice in legislation, but it's up to adults to like give them that window and give them that opportunity. So right now, Ozone House has been having community conversations with Ellie Savitt, and I think it's going to become a normal thing where it opens the door for any young person can join the conversation and ask questions and talk to Ellie himself. So I think as long as organizations keep opening the windows for young people to have those conversations, and if those opportunities aren't there, talking to the organizations and being like, how can I how can I talk to this person? Because that's usually the barriers. Like, I know what I want, but I don't know who to go to or what to say. And so there's all these organizations here on the call right now that are waiting for young people to come to us and be like, and help them in any way that we can.
If I had to say the one thing that pushes policy in education that is the strongest, it's youth voice. Like, one of the things that happened as a result of our gathering yesterday was that one of the state senators asked us to put together a video of these stories that he can take to committee, right? So now the kids have their next steps. So it's not just a one and done either. If you really want to make an impact on policy, it's a bunch of steps with some adults who can guide you through it. And then once you learn that, you can take your own group through. Pay it forward.
I love that. And I'm also really excited about that opportunity that happened yesterday, that like that he was interested in that. It was really cool. So
what was yesterday? Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, you're fine.
I'm going to let Alana tell you, because she actually facilitated a huge part of the presentation for the senators and representatives who were there.
So basically, it was called like Advocacy Day, like advocating for after school programming, and like just kind of reminding them that Bright Futures exists and is important and is doing good things. And so we got to talk to 2 representatives and 2 senators for Michigan, and they like listened to our stories, and so it was really cool to talk to them and stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. But bringing this kind of to a close before we go into our Q&A, our open Q&A, because this is a Q&A, I guess, right now. So what is one thing that you want every person struggling with their mental health to hear?
Obviously, just you're not alone. And I would leave it as simple as that. And like, we're here and you just aren't alone. And yeah.
I would agree. I think it's that simple. We support you.
Mhm.
We care about you. You're not alone.
I was gonna say the same thing. Like, you're not alone. There's support here, right? Wake up today, make the decisions that need to be made, go to sleep, wake up the next day, make the decisions that need to be made, but also finding the support that is there for you. We are here.
And for those who feel that they already have support, share the love. Talk about it. Tell your friends how that support works in your life and invite them to join the party.
And then I guess one kind of last note. So those students who, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but like if they don't know how to reach out and they don't know how to like find those mentors, they don't even like really know about Bright Futures or like any of those kinds of organizations, how should they start? And yeah, also like, how do you think how do you think, I'm sorry, wait, I have to process this question because I just thought of it. How can mental health be broadcasted more in a way to get people more individual help? So like everyone hears about mental health and how it's important, but there's a lot of like they don't know where to start. So yeah, where would you start?
Well, for mental health, right? We hear the word mental health, and again, I think it's becoming a little bit stigmatized personally with that, but we have to start thinking about like we think about physical health, right? You don't have to have an issue to work on your mental health. You work on your mental health to keep it running and bright, right? So to get it out there more, we need to speak about it, advertise it a bit more, market it a bit more as something that is as important as eating and as important as physical health. You want to work on your mental health, you need exercises for your mental health.
Yes, just talk about, if everyone's talking about it, they can hear it, and then they're going to be more apt to like know who to go to. It's reduce the stigma. I mean, if someone's not comfortable asking their parents for that help, it's putting our organizations out there and just giving young people that resource to maybe be able to reach out to in a moment of need, so that they don't have to search and find, or it feels like such a big deal to reach out and figure out what kind of help you need. Like if we put the voices out there, and even the young people, who know of services in the area who aren't struggling, talking about it with their peers, just normalizing it. keeping it in the conversation all the time.
And I think if just from, I think that's all super important. I think just in terms of tangible next steps, if a young person doesn't know where to start, any adult, like at school or at any kind of a youth program, or right, any medical professional, so you can start with your doctor. But if you came to any of us and said you needed help, we might not be able to provide those services, but we can connect you with people that can connect you to the supports. So just naming it to any adult that you trust, we all know how to connect you.
I think if we can normalize feelings, like if you lose a grandparent and you're really sad, that's good. That's the normal response. That's not mental illness, that's mental health. And so we need to normalize the feelings and the responses that we're all having, especially in this COVID space where there's just so much of it, but anytime. And then I think the other piece is if we can just teach each other to ask for help, 3 little words, I need help, and then just some openness to getting some. That would be amazing. And it takes some practice to say that, because for whatever reason in our culture, we're supposed to be tough and strong and nobody needs help. But the truth is, we all need help at different times in our lives. So if we can normalize that request, I need help, that acknowledgement, and praise kids when they ask for help and tell them how wonderful it is that they had the courage to ask. I think that would also be really important to do.
Yeah, I charge everyone here today, if you are on social media, to say, okay, you worked on your physical health. How did you work on your mental health today? What did you exercise in the mental today to make you a better person? And see what the answers and responses are. There's going to be people like, that's a little foggy for me. I don't understand what you're asking, but you're asking, what have you done for yourself and your mental health today,
Amazing. Thank you all so much for sharing your wisdom. I'm walking away from this webinar with so much knowledge, so much to take out into the world that will make it better. And I know that a lot of our listeners are going to be experiencing the same. Alana, thank you so much for facilitating those questions and sharing those super smart, amazing questions. You are incredible. Thank you. So thank you so much to Dr. Lynn Malinov for being our constant source of support, and encouragement and guidance. For those who are just tuning in and don't really know about Community of Creative Champions, we are a youth-led organization that is targeted at amplifying the youth voice in Southeast Michigan. We run an online blog. We also host this series of monthly webinars, and today
Coffee, we lost you for a minute.
You're not here.
we're going to be exploring the youth world and what it's like to be a young person in this space. So we hope that you can join us for future webinars and that you can lend your voice to our conversations in whatever way you can. Uh-oh.
You're okay now.
Oh, I'm back. Okay, good. But yeah, so please check out Community of Creative Champions whenever you can. Our website, we are on the EMU Bright Futures website. And if you're watching this, you have accessed it through either our social media or website. So please check that out. Yes, thank you so much, Lynn, for sharing that. Please do also check out Ozone House, Neutral Zone, and Prevention Theater Collective, 3 vitally important organizations to our community and to our youth who are doing all kinds of incredible work. Hopefully we'll be able to hear from them more in the future and do a lot more collaborating with these wonderful organizations. Suzie, Alex, Ariel, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your wisdom and your experience with us. It's been beautiful having you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for listening. Have a great Saturday. We hope that you'll be joining us again next month. In the meantime, stay warm, take good care of your mental health, and help those around you take care of themselves as well.
And Alana, Alana. Alana knows I'm working on pronouncing her name. You were fabulous. Thank you so much for
Yes.
such wonderful questions and for keeping the conversation moving. Amazing. The best
Thank
thing.
you.
Thank you
Amazing.
so much. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Yes, take care.